Well, the crisis in Iraq only continuing to grow as ISIS militants facing off with the Iraqi army. And today, President Obama, as we showed you, briefing the nation on how America responding to the crisis. And the president says the U.S. will boost surveillance, intelligence, and even send in 300 military advisors. But he made it pretty clear, no boots on the ground. Some Republicans on Capitol Hill say that is the wrong move.
I believe that we, as a superpower without imperialistic aims, have a duty to help maintain an international order and a balance of power, not out of altruism, but out of national interest. And I believe that international order is best maintained through American military might. In fact, I believe that American military might forms its very backbone. But President Obama has always been a reluctant commander-in-chief.
We need to act, Mr. President, but we also need to understand why we are where we are today.
Mr. President, do not take this country back to a pre-9/11 mentality where you treat terrorists as common criminals when you read them their rights rather than gather intelligence. We're letting our defenses erode all over the world. The enemy's emboldened, our friends are afraid. And I tell you this, if we continue on this track, it will come here again.
If anything, former Vice President Dick Cheney even took it one step further. In an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal, co-authored with his daughter Liz Cheney, the vice president said the following: "Rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many. Too many times to count, Mr. Obama has told us he is ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as though wishing made it so. His rhetoric has now come crashing into reality." Well, let's just do reality when it comes to a public poll. CBS News poll came out back in 2011. We're talking about drawing down troops. More than 3 out of every 4 Americans at the time approved of pulling troops out of Iraq, 17% disapproving, and 3% on the fence. And a poll released just this week shows pretty much the same numbers. 3/4 of Americans opposing sending troops back to Iraq, while again, less than 20% say that we should once again go overseas. All right, let's bring in our panel tonight. We are joined by Michael Lyons. Michael's a retired Army major, military analyst, and senior fellow at the Truman National Security Project. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College and professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, oh, so many things, but including a political journalist and author, Richard Brodsky. I could go on there, but a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now senior fellow at Demos, a professor of NYU, and fully embedded in the media. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent as well. All right, I get in my shots, but Michael, you heard what Austin had to say. And before we get into some of the political crossfire that's going on in Washington right now, I think a lot of people say, we can't let this go on unchecked in Iraq. My God, they're making their way to Baghdad. But doesn't seem that anybody's got an appetite to go back in. And you're military, and we've talked about this before. You said, where does it even end? And I think that's the overarching response, which is a question to a question. Like, even if you do something, how does it end? But there are really scary nightmare scenarios if this thing doesn't get fixed.
Yeah, I mean, there is a military solution to this. It's 300,000 troops into Iraq. They start in Kuwait and they just drive up the highway from Basra and take it to Baghdad.
I've seen that movie, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that is the military solution. Now, what the president proposed of 300 special forces guys on the ground, well, first of all, there are boots on the ground. They're going to be at risk. They've got a plan for nightmare scenarios. They could be captured. They are going to go to a combat zone.
Their principal function, as I understand, Mike, protect the embassy and try and at least create a game plan here for the remaining Iraqi military, right?
Yeah, but there's going to be other Green Beret types that are going to be embedded with the Iraqi security forces in their talks, in their command centers. They'll likely be the first eyes on the ground for airstrikes and the like. And then again, they're going to be at risk because they're going to try to look over the horizon, and I'm sure they'll take risks. And I think that's going to be a major issue for this administration should something go wrong with them.
Explain to the audience why military airstrikes sound good, but in theory, but in practicality, it's never that clean.
It's just never surgical as it likes to be. We don't have any idea where these targets are. We don't know what exactly we'd be shooting at. This is a smart enemy. The thing is, the enemy is going to adjust to what the president said today. It hugs up against the civilian society. It doesn't lend itself to come out into the open. It has all these different things to take advantage of what they use and the disadvantage of our great technology.
I want to play a soundbite for you on the table. This was from about 7 years ago, and I'm curious if in retrospect he was right. Let's play the shot from then Senator Joe Biden.
Not in the lifetime of anyone in this room is there a possibility of a central democratic government in Baghdad, trusted by the factions making up this polyglot country called Iraq. So you must decentralize. You must separate the parties within the context of a limited federal government.
He said, hey, went on to say we did in Bosnia, right? Is he right that Sunni and Shia ain't going to get along? They'll never trust Maliki here. He's not going to go down, willingly step down to this plan. So if they'll never get along, divvy the thing up, figure a way to, split up the oil revenues. Is that a possible, let alone a practical solution to this at this point?
Yeah, it could be. I think you have the Sunni faction with Saudi Arabia behind it, the Iranian faction with the Shia faction behind it. It's a possibility. It would mean redrawing all the boundaries, but to your point, it's all about the oil revenue and where it has and where it exists. Right now, there's not, the Sunnis don't have as much control over that in terms of where their space is. It would be the Shia, especially down in Basra into the Persian Gulf region. But again, that's going to take years. It's going to take likely a civil war for that boundary to be redrawn.
All right, guys, I think I'm safe to say that not just the U.S., but globally, there's a fatigue here to the Middle East. If we ever thought there was a coalition of the willing ever, it's not there now. So let's play this out here. If it doesn't stop in Iraq and it bleeds over into Lebanon, if all of a sudden Jordan's got a humanitarian crisis and basically the Sunni-Shia fight spreads out to the other places, and obviously Israel, our ally there, goes from being tense to something much more. Is there a scenario where we do have to get in, or do we say no longer do we have a fight in the Middle East? I'll start with you.
I'm not sure this is bad news. I may be alone in this in the free world, but a clarifying of the sectarian split in the Middle East nations, where the Sunnis and the Shia, who hate each other, are no longer bound by national boundaries, may in some sense lessen the strategic problem of having nation states that are hostile to the United States. I'm not suggesting there'll be a redrawing of boundaries, and I'm certainly not suggesting armed intervention. What I'm saying is this needs to be manipulated and understood as a strategic opportunity more so than, oh my God, the same crazy people who got us into Iraq to that disaster are now saying we should go back in and try to do the same thing. That's the danger. The virtue here is maybe this president can figure out a way to use this chaos to maximize the American self-interest in ways that no American president has ever done.
But these guys, it's not like, there's two differences of opinion. They want to bring back Sharia law as the law of the land everywhere. And I'm not suggesting it's a country club now.
I'm not for imposing Sharia law.
I know you're not, but I'm saying, can we, listen.
Yes, we can. We can simply say, settle it out yourselves, and identify the American self-interest as oil supply, which is a legitimate American self-interest, peace with the non-fighting countries, Israel most importantly, try to keep places like Egypt separate, but not decide that we can go in with American Marines and try to settle a sectarian war that is 1,300 years old.
Richard, this battle existed long before in the Middle East, long before all of us were born. And guess what? It's going to be here no matter what we do. After we're gone.
From the Shah that was there in Iran that we put there, from the Mubaraks, from the Saddam Husseins of the world to the Assads and the rest of them, the strongmen basically that took over after, you had the Ottomans, right, and then you had basically the English and the French, and then you had, the iron-fisted guys, bad guys, iron-fisted guys that ran it. Nobody's in charge anymore, and I just don't know how they'll settle it out and it all they'll redraw who's got what, and it's okay.
Richard,
I just don't see how
But the American people, frankly, we don't see that as our problem. I understand there may be American interests, the oil and so on. And you asked how this is going to play out. I agree with I don't know if you would go this far, but with your initial assessment, how this is going to play out, you're dealing with a very volatile situation. The president can say from the Oval Office or the East Room, no boots on the ground, but what happens when the first American soldier, special team soldier, is kidnapped or murdered, or several additional soldiers are murdered? That strategy is going to go out the window, and we're going to find ourselves right back in.
He is. I think I would only go back a couple years here. That the mistake was made with removing those troops to begin with. I mean, nobody in the military wanted that to happen. They wanted a residual force from 8,000 to 12,000 troops there.
There was a report in the Washington Times say that they wanted a 23,000 American force footprint to stay behind. Is that what you've heard?
I've heard a little bit less, but the bottom line is 2 divisions. It's really what it would be. We would have kept heavy armor there, and if we were there, if that was the case, that would clearly have been a deterrent. I mean, that
deterrent to the Sunni crazy people?
The Sunni crazy people were on our side, actually, for the Sunni awakening in 2008, and that we got them to work with us against al-Qaeda.
There is no military solution that can be imposed upon a sectarian war that has existed for 1,300 years. The notion that you can find a military way out of this strikes me as being unwilling to learn from history.
No. The force that's there at least keeps the sides separated from each other. That's really what it would have done. ISIS would not have.
That force have to stay there indefinitely? Wouldn't
and we did it. We did that in Korea, and we did that at the end of World War II. The only time we didn't do that was the end of Vietnam, for obvious reasons.
But this is a religious war. Those others were political wars. There is a difference. People who are motivated by their religious faith and into a posture of being combatants are not going to make the same rational calculations that we're sitting here making. Get the hell out and make the best of it.
I have a side question that it sounds maybe a sidebar thing, but I never got, which is why, if you're nuts enough to strap bombs to your chest, okay, and to obviously take your life in the name of some cause, why hasn't somebody of this group done this in Tehran? Why is it that it's either there or here, in Iraq or here? My point is there's so many different players in the Middle East. If somebody was intentionally trying to start trouble, why don't they go to some of the other nation states and do it there? I've never understood why there hasn't been more, and I'm glad there hasn't, but more of an accelerant to get in the Tehrans or the Dohas or the rest into this fight directly. And isn't that almost an inevitable next step?
That's because it's hard. It's why people can't get to the United States. I mean, it's hard. The Iranian government, the borders are very tight. They run that country with an iron fist as well. So they've got their eyes on everybody. Look, if we had U.S. forces in there still, it's not just the tanks. It would have been the network, the infrastructure. You know, what we failed to bring to Iraq was capitalism. If we'd started importing other things besides bullets and the like, things might have been a little bit different as well. That happened in Europe.
That's a very sensible doctrine, except this is a religious war. It is not like Bosnia. It is not like Korea. It is not like Vietnam.
Bosnia was religious. It was religious.
There were religious elements to it, fair enough, but it was ethnic. Once you bring people's religious views as a motivating factor into questions of war and peace, the best thing you can do is get as far away from it as you can get.
I just don't know, and you've forgotten more about this on it, if they just fight it and get it out of the system. I just don't think it ends there, and I think that's what's really going on at world capitals around the world for all different reasons, whether it be for energy self-interest or whether it be like time out. This isn't going to stop here. Where's the next domino fall, and then what happens after it? For all of us who celebrated the Arab Spring in Egypt, we didn't, many of us at least, predict how the whole thing turned out. And I think so much uncertainty in the Middle East, all happening at the same time, I don't know. But Mike, thank you so much. I have a feeling this isn't the last time we're going to be talking about this. All right. When we come back, though, we will shift gears and leave the Middle East and head back to our neck of the woods. Major potential news coming out of New Jersey. And I hate to admit it, but Dominic may be right here. Federal prosecutors here say that they are closing in on Governor Christie. Should the governor be nervous about all this digging and some of these imminent indictments that could be coming down to his inner circle? That and more after this.